And we are live. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Chrystal, and I'll be your host for tonight's episode. This is our sixth live episode of DEI Unmasked Conversations That Bridge. Again, my name is Chrystal, and today we'll be discussing something that is a little bit of a lost art, and that is how to effectively lead diverse teams. Throughout our conversation, we'll explore many ways that a diverse team can be led and how not taking the time to adjust your leadership methods can be to the detriment of your team and ultimately affect performance and team performance and organizational performance. But before we dive in, I have a little bit of housekeeping items. I wanted to make it clear that the views and opinions expressed on this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organization, company, or entity that we may be associated with. Our discussions are personal and meant for entertainment and informative purposes only. During this live, if you would like to utilize closed captions, we encourage you to do so. To enable them, simply navigate to the settings on your viewing platform. Additionally, we value your participation and we would love to stay connected with you. Please visit our LinkedIn page and follow us. While you're there, we encourage you to sign up for our email list once we launch it. We're in the process of launching it, should be coming soon. By doing so, you'll receive timely alerts to our upcoming live sessions. So make sure you do that. As always, DEI Unmasked is not just a podcast, it's an invitation to peel back the layers, reveal depth, and engage in a transformative dialogue. So, without further ado, let's unmask together. First, I want to introduce my co hosts, Tanasha and Leandra. Our other two co hosts, Courtni and Greta, are unable to join us tonight, but they'll be back with us for our next episode. So let's get started. First, I want to start talking about conventional approaches to leading diverse teams. Some of these ideas are already incorporated with a lot of organizations, and really they should be the bare minimum of what an effective leader should be doing to lead a thriving team and create a positive and inclusive environment. A lot of times you'll hear organizations say, bring your authentic self to work, or you'll see it listed in their mission statements. Despite a lot of this, lots of organizations still aren't taking the necessary steps to ensure that this will happen. Focus should really be placed on creating environments where people feel safe enough to be their authentic selves in the workplace. All right, so let's talk about some conventional approaches. And again, these are approaches that lots of companies and organizations are currently implementing within their workspaces. The first one is obvious. You want to embrace diversity. You want to recognize and approach unique backgrounds, perspectives, experiences of each team member. You want to encourage an inclusive environment where people feel valued and respected. You want to put it out there as if it's pretty obvious that an organization would embrace diversity, so to speak, but you want to actually verbalize that with people. A lot of people don't come into your organization intuitively knowing that you're going to embrace them as a diverse person. Number two, you want to communicate clearly and use clear and open communication to ensure that expectations, goals, and responsibilities are understood by everyone. Be mindful of language barriers and communication styles. Lots of people don't communicate the same way you do. So you want to make sure that you are mindful of different communication styles and then adapt it as you come across team members that need a different communication style. You want to promote collaboration by fostering a culture where team members can openly share ideas, collaborate on projects, and learn from one another. Encourage cross-functional teamwork to leverage diverse skills and knowledge. Collaboration is great amongst teams, but it's even better when you're collaborating across teams. So you have finance and you have claims working together on projects. You have accounting and IT working together on projects. That really, really deepens the probability of people getting to know one another and enhancing like their knowledge bases. Providing equal opportunities, of course, making sure that each team member has equal opportunity for growth, development, and advancement. Address bias and discrimination. You want to be proactive in addressing the bias, the microaggressions, and the discrimination. And not only do you want to address it, you want to make sure that something is actually, there's a corrective measure taken to prevent that from happening again. A lot of organizations sometimes forget that while there may be a discriminatory action happening with one employee, the other employees or other team members they will be seeing this happening, and they in their minds could say, hey, this could very well happen to me as well. So by taking action on that bias and discriminatory act, you're making it safe not only for that one person, but for the other people that are there as well. You want to lead by example, of course. That should be self-explanatory. You definitely want to celebrate differences. I think a lot of companies do this. Cultural holidays, diversity events, those are the fun and feel-good things that companies do. If you have a team that's primarily from a background, like a religious background, for instance, you want to make sure that you're giving them opportunities to celebrate their holidays as a team instead of just simply throwing a celebration in honor of that holiday. You want to make sure that they have the appropriate time off, or that they have spaces to have any type of prayer or religious rituals in the workspace. So that's a way that you could celebrate differences by not just having a cultural celebration. And the last thing I have on here for that is seek feedback. You want to regularly ask your team for feedback. A lot of people don't like to do that because it's a little scary. It's a little scary, and it's I think a lot of times people are afraid of what they're going to hear as far as the feedback is concerned. But by the simple act of asking for feedback, you're going to send a message that, hey, I really care about what I'm trying to do here. Am I missing the mark? Am I on target? Are there areas where I need to improve as far as helping you feel safe and able to bring your authentic self to work? And I mean, just the simple act of that speaks a lot of volumes to team members. So as I turn the conversation over to our co-hosts, I'd like to hear from the audience. Are there any specific things or special approaches that you take to lead your diverse teams? And has this leadership technique worked for you, and in what way? Tanasha, do we have any comments as of yet? I'll also take some comments.
I've got a comment, but I do not see any comments on the chat yet, at least not through StreamYard.
Okay.
I really wanted to kind of to double click into the communicating clearly part of things as I stumble on those words, which is kind of ironic. I think that part, like while all of these points are really important, I think communicating clearly and also communicating rules and policies really clearly is so important, because I'm just thinking about, like, if the policy says make a sandwich, there are so many different ways in which people are going to make that sandwich, whether you're going to cut it on diagonal and get your little triangles, whether you're going to just make and eat the sandwich full. Is it going to be on a hoagie? Is it going to be on rye? Like, there are so many different ways that someone can fulfill a prompt. And if there are all of these unspoken rules that you should know, or everyone knows that we do it this way, but it hasn't been written anywhere, there are people who are going to come in and do it a way that still fulfills what needs to get done, but isn't doing it the way that one might have thought they would do it. And so I think it's really important when establishing norms on a team or when making policies is that you are super specific, and not necessarily in a way that people aren't going to get it, but sometimes you need to be brutally clear. And sometimes when you see one of those really odd warning labels on a particular product, it's like, somebody misused this product because the directions didn't say you're not allowed to do that, but you didn't think to write that in the policy until someone did that thing. And so I think that communicating clearly both comes in how you're interacting with people on a social basis or how you're interacting with your employees or your colleagues, but also in policies and in how you're telling people how to do certain parts of the job. They need to make sense, and they also need to be clear, so you don't have people thinking that they have followed your instructions deliberately,
Right.
but have not met your expectations because of the unspoken rules that you have not let them know about.
Right. Exactly. Thank you, Leandra. That's you're exactly spot on. I have totally agree with you on those points. Tanasha, do you have
Yes.
any reflections?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm just looking here through the comments, and Cooper was saying how much accessibility matters. Are also their accessibility matters, tongue-tied, can kind of be swept under the rug, whether it's someone understanding best with a screen reader or a higher color contrast or non-oral communication support during presentations or meetings, or other options that people don't want anyone's methodology left out. And that's such an important point, Cooper. And I think that really speaks to what you were just saying, Leandra, about the importance of clear communication. Because one of the things that happens when we're communicating expectations clearly is that we also give people an opportunity to express their needs to us in a clear fashion. Because when a leader communicates with someone on their team, that gives that team member the opportunity to say if there's something that they may need that may be left out of what the leader has provided up to that point. So that's very important. He was also, it seems like, laughing about team building exercises and the company family mantra and, those kinds of things. It's like, we're a family here. Well, all depending, some of us, like me, don't really associate with our families because they may be too dysfunctional and toxic. And so that doesn't have the positive connotation that you might necessarily think it has. Sometimes chosen family is a safer space. But I really think that I have seen some of those ways where things can be done so ineffectively over the course of my career. And I've been fortunate that it hasn't typically been my direct leader or people I have been leading, but I've seen examples of it on other teams. I've seen, the leader who would yell and scream at people and berate their team members in front of the rest of the team, and things that are just really, really demoralizing and frankly psychologically harmful for people. And so I think that how leaders show up is important, because there's this notion of the importance of intention and having good intention. But I'm also going to say, and you'll probably hear me say this a million more times over the course of this podcast, that impact matters more than intention. So you can start with good intention, but as a leader, you have to possess the emotional intelligence to acknowledge the impact that you are having on your team. And so when things are going on in that team and it may not be working out quite the way that a leader wants it to, it's really the leader's responsibility to set the tone for the team. That is what a leader does. So that's why it's important for leaders to model things like vulnerability and showing that, hey, I'm in this leadership role, but guess what? Sometimes I'm confused too. I don't always know the answer, and I'm not afraid to ask someone who can help me if I need to ask that person. So modeling from leaders is a very, very important part when we're talking about leading diverse teams and wanting those teams to feel inclusive. If you have a leader who never takes vacation time, what does that say to the team? That says to the team, well, clearly this person doesn't believe we're supposed to take time off because they never do. So maybe I just won't ask to take time off because I don't know how it will be received. And then you have people who get burned out after that because they're not taking time. So I think there are a lot of things for leaders to consider. But I just keep thinking about what you said, Leandra, about communication and communicating clearly, because that's got to be the foundation. If nothing else, that's got to be the foundation.
Right. Thank you, Tanasha. And I love that because if anything, leaders are models, like they should be. I think the most powerful thing a leader can do is say that they don't know something. I don't know, but let's find out. Let's research it. And you don't see that a whole lot in leadership. I think leaders in their minds think a lot of times, oh, I have to be the expert. I have to know all the answers, and that's just not realistic as a human being. So I think that's one of the most powerful things that a leader could do is to say, I don't know this thing, or I'm learning this thing, or reaching out to their team and say, you know what, can you tell me more about this thing? I don't know everything about it, but I would like to learn more. And I think that's such a powerful thing that a leader could do. Um, Leandra and Tanasha, you both touched on my next question, actually a little bit, which is what are some examples of leadership methods that you've observed that are not effective in leading teams? And why did those methods fail? And what were the lasting results that you've seen?
Your expression is saying so much to me right now, Leandra. Did you have something you wanted to share?
I mean, I feel
Share.
like there are so many different ways that people have tried to force team camaraderie where it's like the only events that are being planned to get folks together are happy hours or super social icebreakers where there are people who either aren't like cool with their coworkers like that, or they're not social like that, or they have something to do after work that doesn't that makes them not want to or unable to be able to go to a dive bar at 5 p.m. because there are other obligations. I'm thinking about like how I've seen friendships and cliques grow in certain organizations because of that availability or willingness to go to the happy hour or go to play ping pong during breaks where it's like, I need to spend my break calling the bank to do XYZ, or, I need to go to the gym or do a doctor's appointment. Like there are so many reasons why people are unable to do certain forced activities. And so I think that something that's been really significant for me is like, different events that are being created with accessibility in mind, and not just in terms of my disability or my neurodivergence, but in terms of thinking about parents and caregivers, or thinking about people who have noise sensitivity, and maybe laser tag isn't the thing that they want to be doing to bond with their coworkers. Maybe it's a casual Zoom room, or maybe it's a lunch and learn or something like that. I think the forced aspect of like trying to force community and force that sense of family has been really kind of weird, like that ill feeling. I also think another thing that doesn't work or hasn't worked in my experience is when people apply one particular learning assessment or project review, or like when they're applying something to everyone and they're assuming that this particular thing is going to work for everybody. So this project needs to be done this way and this way only, and there's no willingness to budge within how someone views how something is supposed to be done, while there are a diversity of brains in the room who could expand or innovate on what's already been created. I think being stuck in your ways and unwilling to learn or wanting to be the smartest person in the room when there is infinite knowledge to gain from everyone around you, I think that has been a barrier to inclusion as well. Just like if you want to be the authority and the smartest in the room, it makes it very hard to listen to others. And there are leaders who master that balance. But if I'm the smartest in the room, I need to find other rooms because I need to continue learning and growing. And it's really important for me to be surrounded by a team who knows a lot about stuff that I don't know about, so we can all grow and contribute together. But yeah. My face was saying all the things because I was thinking through a few weird team experiences and odd bosses that I've had that want to be chummy but don't know how to really strike that balance of helping me with my career growth and being my boss while also wanting to be my buddy. There has to be a balance there, and I think that folks have a really hard time striking that, and that can also result in people getting favorited or because of your chumminess with the boss. So yeah, it's really interesting to witness that happening to others as someone who befriends almost everyone I encounter.
Yeah.
It's not fair to leave the folks who are not as outgoing behind just because they don't have the same knack for small talk as other people do. But yeah, I'll go on mute now. I'll jibber jabber about weird boss moments all day long.
I'm like, dude, share. Continue to share as much as you like. Tanasha, did you have any reflections?
Yes, I was going to say, Cooper said, he put a comment in here, says, stupid people think they have all the answers. Wise ones ask a lot of questions. And that is such an excellent point from Cooper. I saw a comment this week, and I immediately said I was adding this to my lexicon. One of the things we talk about is the difference between, that I'm always thinking about, is the difference between an opinion versus an educated opinion. And there's a big difference. Like, I have opinions about how I think engineering works. However, I am not an engineer. So therefore, I do not have an educated opinion on engineering. And someone had used the term wrong and strong about when people have, they don't have an educated opinion on something, how they can be, really wrong and strong about holding on to that opinion. And that really gets into kind of that fixed mindset thinking, because when you have that opinion and that is just what you believe and you're going to hold on to that, then what happens is you don't open yourself up to learn from people who may have education and experience that you don't have. So just like Leandra was just saying, as a leader, you have to be mindful to not be the kind of leader who's the only authority and the only person who knows anything. And because in that situation, instead of pulling from the strengths of the people on your team who all have their varied experiences, you're actually limiting your team's creativity because you're unwilling to see that other people will have things of value that they can contribute. And I think that lack of awareness for a leader can really create a toxic culture for a team. And that's something that people have to be mindful of, because there's the overall organizational culture, but then there are also those cultures within those teams. Because I'm sure we have all seen in our career where we may be a part of the team where, oh my gosh, we have the best culture and everybody gets along and we work so well together. And we may observe another team where it seems like they're not all on the same page. There's a lot of friction taking place, or we may have been in a situation where we were on a team where the friction was taking place. And we're like, well, how do we get to a place where everything is better? Because I'm looking at this team over here and they all seem to work so well together. And so it's important to really be, I think, mindful of how we're interacting with others, especially as a leader, and knowing how to deal with any conflict that may arise in our teams, because conflict can actually present an opportunity for growth and an opportunity for people to learn. But just like the leader sets the tone for the team, they also set the kind of mindset that the team has as well. So if the leader is engaging in fixed mindset thinking and they just don't want to hear anything, don't want to think about it, don't want to consider it, then it doesn't make them approachable for their team, because, hey, the leader is the expert. So why are we here? They don't really need us. And one of the things that we know about people in terms of people working is that the type of motivation that they have matters. So are they intrinsically motivated? Because they're just motivated to do their role. They love what they do. They're happy to be there. Or are they extrinsically motivated by the things that they see around them? And for people who may not have as high of a level of internal intrinsic motivation, it can be very harmful to their job performance if they're looking for that outside motivation in their team and there's just a lot of friction and there are things going on and there's uncertainty. You see, when we see things, especially in this economy, like layoffs taking place, like how do you handle that within your team and still keep your team motivated and feeling safe and secure under those conditions? So there are all of these moving parts that leaders really have to consider. And frankly, just recognizing as a leader, when you have people on your team who come from backgrounds that you do not come from, because your thoughts, your biases on what you think their background may have been like is not the same as listening to their lived experience in their background. And I can't tell you how many times I've spoken up about something that happened because of all this beautifully melanated skin, only to be told by a white person that something did not happen to me because I was Black. And my immediate thought is, oh, is that based on your experience as a Black person? Well, clearly not, because you're not Black, so you don't have that experience. So I think for leaders, it's important when we talk about the diversity of those teams to recognize the differences in those backgrounds and not to just dismiss what someone has to say because it may not be what you think is most relevant in their background. Because if you have a team member who's sharing something with you, they're sharing it with you for a reason. And so that means that you have to be open and receptive to what they're saying. So those are just some of my thoughts. And let's see, what did Cooper say? Cooper said, Leandra, he said, savor the rabbit holes.
I have one more thing to add to this particular prompt. I was just thinking about being the only in a team and how I feel like often, like I have added a little bit to the diversity of the team, but now I'm being expected to be the spokesperson for all people of color all over the world because I'm the only one here to give that perspective. And while I think it's important to get those perspectives, I do not want my opinion to be asked for simply because I happen to check off a certain amount of boxes. But also on the other end of that spectrum is I don't want my opinion to be, just like kind of shrugged off because I'm just one person and I'm not a representative of the entire population. Like I matter, but I'm not, like we're not a monolith. So I can speak from my experience as a Black person, as a queer person, etc. But I cannot say that this is how every single Black person that you will encounter is going to feel about this particular issue, policy, product, project, etc. And so I think it's really important to not like give all of the things that may be pertinent to the diverse populations to the one person of color in the room or to the one woman in the room. Like these conversations need to be had and led by everyone, not just the marginalized person in the room. It's a lot of pressure to be expected to speak for every Black person on earth.
Absolutely.
That's
down with tokenization.
Are very different.
Yeah, it's a lot of heavy lifting. I like that. Thank you, Tanasha and Leandra. Do we have any other questions, comments, anything coming in before I jump into our unconventional approaches? Nope. Okay. So now we'll talk about...
Continue.
Oh, thank you. In the next segment, we'll be discussing a few unconventional approaches. I use that term loosely because there are some organizations out there using some of these approaches. We've heard of some of them already, but I would venture to say that the majority of organizations out here aren't practicing these methods. So I use that term loosely. The first thing that's at the top of my list, people don't like to talk about it, but it's true. And I fully support it and back it. It's embracing flexible work arrangements. You want to offer flexible work hours, remote work hours to accommodate different cultural practices, time zones, personal preferences. Even a lot of people, again, don't think that you may have somebody that has an invisible disability or even a visible one, regardless of what type of disability they have. If they need to work remotely for a portion of the time or for the bulk of the time, that should be considered. And someone shouldn't have to come out and say, I'm feeling anxious, I need to work remotely. You should be able to allow that flexibility for anyone on the team. I mean, you yourself as a leader may be feeling some anxiety or something, and you may want to work remotely. It may be a temporary thing. It may just be like a something lasting a few days. If you offer those flexible work arrangements, you give your teams those autonomy to decide what's working for them and what doesn't. And really, you have to trust your team in order to do this. Like if you don't trust them, why do you even have them on your team to begin with? If you can't trust that they're not going to get the work done because they're working remotely, then you have a much larger issue at hand, in my opinion. You want to encourage creative problem solving. foster a culture of creativity and innovation, encourage team members to work and approach different problems from different perspectives. If you want them to do a bottom up approach and they want to do it top down, let them do the top down approach. If they want to come at it from an angle to kind of understand the components of the problem and then come up with a solution that way, you should be open to them arriving at that solution on their own. Again, people think differently, people solve problems differently, they approach things differently. Let them do what's natural to them. If they arrived at the desired result, that's what we want. If they don't, then that's an entirely different situation where you may need to show them exactly what it is that you're looking for, the end result that is. So you want to encourage people to think on their own and solve problems on their own, and that's really the best way for people to learn. You want to promote cross-cultural experiences. I think for the most part, a lot of organizations do this. They encourage team members to share aspects of their culture, traditions, experiences. But again, people aren't going to do that if they don't feel safe enough to do so. They don't feel like they can talk about these things, and here in this workspace is a safe environment. They're not going to be prone to open up about these cultural experiences. Implement cross mentoring and reverse mentoring. Lots of organizations, lots of companies that I've worked for do mentoring, but they rarely do reverse mentoring. Cross mentoring relationships is where team members from different backgrounds or levels may have a VP with a mid-level associate mentor-mentee relationship, and when they mentor each other. And then you have reverse mentoring where a junior associate is mentoring a senior associate. And that's valuable insight because your junior associate more than likely has a different perspective than that senior associate. So not only are they mentoring each other, they're learning from one another. And that really is what a mentor-mentee relationship should be in the first place. They can provide valuable insights, promote knowledge sharing, and break down hierarchical barriers. So that's definitely something that a lot of companies should think about doing. Create diversity advocates. Now, I feel very particular about this. You want to make sure that you have employees who want to champion inclusivity, diversity, raise awareness, support initiatives. They can identify, but you want to empower them to make the decisions regarding these things. Like it's more than just planning celebrations, planning, cultural celebrations. You want to empower them to look at the numbers to see what the real diversity numbers are. You want to empower them to, approach senior leadership about decisions that affect the masses. You want to empower them, give them the power to actually make the changes that they're putting so much time and effort into driving. And then I feel like you should pay them for their time and efforts. It could be a one-time annual bonus for their time, because it's a lot of heavy lifting. I think a lot of people who don't dive into diversity work, they don't realize that it's a lot of heavy lifting. It's a lot of self-reflection, and then it's a lot of examination of their peers. It's a lot. I think that there should be some sort of incentive for that type of work to be done within an organization. You want to implement blind recruitment, which is something that a lot of companies do, or they say that they do. Basically, you're scrubbing resumes of any type of identifying factors that would allude to their race, their creed, their gender, so forth and so on. I think there's some room for improvement, but I think a lot of companies, like I said, are actually doing this. I think that they could probably utilize some AI tools to ensure that that these factors are not coming into play when it comes to candidate decisions. I'm going to pause there for a second. Do we have any comments, Tanasha? I think we might.
So let's see. Cooper had a comment a little while ago, a couple minutes ago, says true. What exactly does one person's point of view represent, and which things does it not apply to?
Good point. Thank you, Cooper. That's a very good point. Let's see. Is there anything else that I am not seeing? I think my comments are not fully loading on my end, so I definitely want to check. Okay. I'll continue with my ideas, the list here that I have. You want to encourage cross-functional projects. I love this because you may have somebody on your team that is, let's say they're better with numbers, and they may want to go into the actuarial department to learn a little bit more about how that division works. And not only that, for their personal development, but it may enable them to do what they do for you better if they understand how the inner workings of the other departments that are around them work. Like if they understand what actuarial does and how it pours into, for example, a claims department. If they understand how the inner workings work over there, then they could do their job a little bit better, or maybe do their assessments a little bit better on the claim side. Just to kind of give a little background, I'm from the insurance industry, so I'm going to use insurance examples for my examples, and I'm not sure if the masses out there know that, but yeah, like you want to make sure you're exposing your team to different areas so that they can have a better understanding of how things fit and how things work and how their work impacts others. You want to, for cultural immersion programs. I love this, and I really wish I had the opportunity to do this with the past companies that I worked for, providing opportunities for team members to participate in cultural immersion programs like exchange programs or international assignments. It allows them to gain firsthand experience in different cultural contexts and then develop a deeper understanding of global diversity. I've seen some companies out there that have those programs, and they offer it to a handful of people. I think offering this type of program to any associate that's interested, I think would be a great move for an organization to do. It shows that they value those team members and that they fully think that they're capable to, get out there and represent the company in such a great and major way. I love that idea, and I really wish a lot more companies would consider doing that for anyone, regardless of what your level is. This next one, a lot of people don't. Again, it's a lot of work, so a lot of people don't really do it, especially depending upon your team size. But you want to take the initiative to learn about your team. You want to know what motivates them, what challenges do they face, what are their strengths and weaknesses. How can you help them be better, be a better employee, do a better job with their work? Like, is there something that they need from you? A lot of times we just lead, and especially if you have a large team, it's difficult to get to know each and every person. I do understand that. But if you at least try to make an effort to get to know people, out of some of those people out of that large amount, it definitely will speak volumes for you and your leadership style. Implementing diversity scorecards will help you to track your progress and performance in your diversity and inclusion initiatives, using those metrics to assess your strengths and identify areas for improvement. Lots of companies are currently implementing this. I think they really paying attention to the metrics and in which way they're trending will definitely help you keep a finger on the pulse of what's happening in your organization. Facilitating cultural competency and sensitivity training. I think just about every company that I've encountered has been doing this. This is definitely an ongoing effort, and you want to make sure that you continue to facilitate these trainings as diversity and inclusion continues to change. It changes constantly. So you want to make sure you also keep a finger on the pulse of this, and that as soon as there's some new cultural trend thing out there, that you're learning about it and that you're educating your teams about it. Establishing employee resource groups. Lots of companies have this as well, just based on common interests, identities, and backgrounds. Encouraging psychological safety. Once again, you want to make sure that you are telling people that this is a safe space and actually making it a safe space. Letting them feel comfortable expressing their opinion, sharing feedback without reprimanding, and taking risks without fear, judgment, or retribution. That's really the only way that they're going to really feel safe, is if once these different ideas are expressed and they're not being judged for it, they'll start to open up. I mean, it's just the more comfortable people feel, the more they'll start to open up. Support your diversity in leadership, of course, making sure that you have diverse leaders on your team, on your workforce. Celebrating company culture. Making sure that your mission statements are actually what you're living, what your organization is living. Having AI-driven diversity and inclusion tools. Now, I thought this was interesting. Utilize AI-driven tools and platforms that analyze data to identify diversity gaps, monitor inclusion metrics, and provide actionable insights for improving initiatives. These tools can help leaders make data-informed decisions and track progress more effectively, and it leaves less room for human error when it comes to reporting your diversity metrics. I'm going to pause again for any comments. Tanasha, do we have any?
Looks like some folks are having some network issues, some issues with their network. So it's kind of slowing down their comments when they're trying to put in comments. I did want to share, when you talk about psychological safety, when we think about psychological safety and the 4 stages of psychological safety, the first stage is inclusion safety. So when you're leading a diverse team, if someone does not feel like they are being included in that team, and it's difficult when you come into an organization as a new person and there are already established relationships, or when you transfer to a new team or get promoted and or with a different team or different department, it can be difficult coming in as a new person and just feeling like you're a part of that team. So for leaders who are leading those teams, it's really important that they make sure that they are embracing anyone new who's coming onto the team, because once again, as the leader, they are modeling and setting that tone for the rest of the team. Because if you don't have inclusion safety, you never make it to challenger safety. So you cannot skip step 1 and go straight to step 4 when you think about psychological safety. Like, there has to be that foundational level of inclusion safety. And that can be more complicated depending on someone's intersectional identities. Like if you're someone who's neurodivergent and you learn differently, just like the point Leandra was making earlier about people who may not be able to make it to something that you're having that's after hours because they're caregivers, they have other responsibilities, they may not be able to afford to go. You know, sometimes the company may pay, but sometimes people may have to pay for themselves. Financially, some people may not be able to afford to do those things. So that inclusion safety is one of those things where I think, once again, leaders have to be not just in intentional, but they have to monitor the impact that it's having on their team. Because if you don't have psychological safety within your team, you really don't have anything. And the hard part about going through those 4 stages of psychological safety is that someone can make it to the top. Now, I have been in this position, even in the last, say, 10 years of my career, where I really thought I had made it all the way to have that challenger safety. And then the second I challenged, oh, nope, sorry, I was a problem. Then I was being treated like I was aggressive. I was being offered communication training when I have a whole entire degree in communication by people who have no communication degrees. So it's like, is the toxic culture the problem, or is my communication the problem? Because me calling out the toxic culture is not a communication problem. That's not a problem with my communication. And so people can get to that highest level of psychological safety, and then things can start to happen and they can go back down and feel like, well, maybe I just have inclusion safety. I don't even know if I have learner safety at this point. So it's like a sliding scale. So it's one of those things where, you know, for leaders, they have to really constantly be monitoring that. And I think some of the ideas that you're bringing forth in this are ways for leaders to really make sure that they are providing that psychological safety for their teams and accounting for, once again, those differences in the intersectional identities. Because someone who's Black and straight may have different needs to feel included, as opposed to someone like myself who's Black and queer, you know, so there may be some differences, and neurodivergent. So there may be some differences there. So I think it's important to be mindful. Let's see.
I agree. Yeah.
Questions on the LinkedIn event. Let's see
if I see some questions that came through that aren't coming through StreamYard. So, Monica
thank you.
asked, what are your recommendations for leaders to overcome the return to office fixed mindset?
Ooh,
that's a good
take
one.
that one, Chrystal?
Yes, go for it.
So I think with return to office, I think, frankly, it is on organizations to understand that with the way the world works today, people have now seen that they can perform the duties of their role either entirely remotely or on a hybrid work schedule. And it's really not it should not be the responsibility of employees to have to adjust to a full return to work request. If you have given, or obligation, if you have given people the opportunity to have a hybrid or full-on remote work schedule, then it's completely unfair to expect people to maintain the same level of motivation in their role when you essentially pull the rug out from underneath them and say, everybody has to go back to the office. I mean, you hear about these organizations where they're saying the people, well, you have to live this close to the office to work remotely. And now they're going, no, everyone has to return to office. Wait a minute. You cannot realistically expect people to uproot their entire lives, including their families, their children, their spouses. And their spouses may have jobs where they're in office, so they can't just move away when the other person is required to go into an office that they weren't required to be in before. So, I mean, as a leader, I would definitely say that it is, thank you, Monica. She said, very well said. I think it is very important for organizations to understand that the way in which people are willing to work, the way in which we're willing to show up for work, it has changed. And in some ways, offering people either an entirely remote or a hybrid work schedule can actually increase productivity. Because guess what you don't have? You don't have people who are always worn out because they have a 90-minute commute just to get to work, and then a 90-minute commute to get home. So I think that organizations really have to find out how to balance that if they want to retain their top people, that top talent, because our expectations as workers have changed. And as much as organizations may not like that, sorry, there are other organizations who understand that, and people will opt to go someplace else. So you'll just see a revolving door of people. Like, I don't know anybody who wants to specifically be in an office every day. I know people who like hybrid. I know people who need remote. If you don't have spaces that are accessible for your employees who have disabilities, how can you expect them to return to work every day when you don't even have things in place for them to just get in and out and navigate the office safely? So I think the realistic part is that organizations have to understand. It's like that thing where you let's say you see something new that you've never seen before, and you're like, wow, I'm going to try, and you get a chance to try it, and it's just life-changing, and it's amazing. And that's how a lot of people have felt about that opportunity to have hybrid or completely remote work. And so people are unwilling to go back. You know, those of us who do not own these organizations are unwilling to go back to just being in your office every day so you can try to monitor and micromanage everything that we do. Like, people just are not going to work that way anymore. And sorry, but organizations they're going to have to accept that. Otherwise, they're going to have to deal with a buttload of turnover. That's the best way I could say it.
I wholeheartedly agree. And so do a lot of the audience. Thank you, Tanasha.
Another question that came in through LinkedIn that I don't think came through on our side is, what are your recommendations in terms of employee engagement with larger teams? I want to kind of expand on this as well. This one is from Monica. I'm thinking about when you have dispersed teams as well. So not only is your team large, but you have teams that are either in different locations, or you have a team of people who are doing office work versus teams that are doing field work or customer work. How do you work on employee engagement and inclusion when you have diverse teams that are not all in the same place, kind of like the working from home situation creates?
Do you want me to take that one, Chrystal, or would you like to answer?
Go for it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I would just say something that I think of, you know, right off the bat is the importance of that creativity that Chrystal has been talking about quite a bit tonight, and figuring out those creative ways to have your teams engage. Something that I did in an organization that I thought was really nice was I was in a leadership training group, but we were meeting virtually. And so we would get like a Uber Eats that they would send to each of us, and we would meet at a scheduled time, but everybody could show up and we could kind of all have lunch together. And so we were all in different places, which, you know, with Uber Eats, you have to time everything just right. And then they switch your driver a million times or whatever happens. But it was an opportunity for everyone who was in this group, and there were probably about 20 of us, for everyone who was in this group to kind of be together and have a shared meal and kind of a shared experience and just that shared conversation. So I think really utilizing the tools that are available to bring people together when they are in different places and spaces. I mean, that's 20 years ago. It would not have been possible to have Zoom meetings because people weren't working remote like they are today. And so I think utilizing some of those tools can be a great way to do that. I also worked at an organization where they would send kind of like care packages to everyone. And so that would kind of foster this feeling of being part of a team. It's like, oh, you got socks, you got a mug. And you could see on LinkedIn all the time people sharing like the different boxes that they're getting from different organizations. And, oh, my team just got this, and I'm so grateful for this. And so those are kind of some of those ways that foster that feeling of being a part of something that's bigger than ourselves. I hope that made sense.
Yes, it did, Tanasha. Yeah.
And the only other comment, we got a lot of absolutely's 100, speak on it. But we got a comment from Patricia who mentioned that moving from one state to another can also cause employees to lose certain protections, like at-will employment states and other DEI related things, like in terms of, trans identity and things like that. There are so many things to consider when it comes to pay transparency, at will employment, that change in between states. And so that's something super important to consider, as well as the cost of living. If you're requiring me to move from the middle of the country to the center of San Francisco, like my rent is going from one to, triple the amount for less space. And so it's so interesting that some of these decisions are being made like so blanketly, if that's a word, over all of these employees, knowing that the cost of living is so vastly different between where you're living, and also that the like the wages of people are very different within an organization as well. So if you want everyone's working remotely, but they're able to pay less rent someplace, but now you're expecting people who are only making $15 an hour to also do a ton of commute and move into a place that costs way more in rent. It's like you're going to lose employees because they can't afford to work for you anymore.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Imagine being unable to afford to work somewhere. Absurd.
That's wild. That's wild.
Absurd. It's such a good
That should
point.
never be.
And you know it happens to people realistically. I mean,
Happens
we know
all the
this
time.
happens to people. Yeah, all the time. Oh, I'm telling you, I think that, and this is the hard thing, organizations will talk about caring and how much they care. You know what's interesting about caring is that it shows in how you treat people. So it sounds good to say that you care about your workforce, but it's much better if you treat them like you care about your workforce, because we have a habit in this society, and especially, I'm just going to say it, in a white supremacist society, there is a habit of talking about the things that we care about as our behavior shows a very clear cognitive dissonance against the values we espouse and say that we hold. So you cannot have it both ways. So caring for people means that you have to show caring for people. It's in an organization's policies. It's in their procedures. It's in how leaders choose to implement those procedures. Like anybody in a leadership role, I will tell you, I have been in a situation, and it was for a state government agency where there were things happening. I had a team of 60 people reporting to me. Yes, Monica, actions speak louder than words. Exactly. Katrina, diversity rhetoric. Exactly. People say things because it sounds good. I could care less what you say because I'm busy looking at what you do, because actions do speak louder than words, and your actions really do tell the truth. And I've been in an organization where I had to resign for ethical reasons. I resigned 4 times in my career, but over refusing to compromise my ethics. Like that, I will not do. If people are not going to be treated well and treated with respect, and we're going to have policies that are biased and that are harmful to the people we say we need in order to get this work done, I'm not going to be a part of that. And so I would always try to implement change, and I would go kind of up the chain of command, which is one of those things I hate to have to do, to kind of go up the chain of command. And it was interesting how many times I would be met with not the policies or procedures being the problem, but me calling out that these policies and procedures are harmful to people. That was the problem. Me speaking on it was the issue, not the policies and procedures. And I don't have time for that. So I think in leadership, as a leader, you have to challenge those things. And if you have psychological safety as a leader, hello, you should be able to challenge policies and procedures within your organization.
And there it is. Do we have any more comments?
We've got one more, like, kind of meaty one, and I know that we're running out of time, but I want to give Jess a little spotlight on this on their comments. I think that this is a big one. There are people in our community who want to start a Black chamber because they don't feel psychologically safe within one of the main chambers of commerce. As a member, I've reached out to the chamber to have a conversation about how we can be more inclusive, and so far, crickets. It's been a week. How do we invite people to have conversations they don't seem to want to have? I think that's something that we face in organizations as well, where you have a lot of momentum with the people of color or the queer folks or like all of the marginalized folks. But then when you want to get to the leadership and get some investment from the folks who may have a little bit more power, a little more resources, suddenly there's crickets, and it's like, like maybe we don't want to have that conversation. So how do you invite people to conversations they don't want to have? That's a question I think we're all regularly trying to answer over and over again in this work. But I don't know, Chrystal or Tanasha, if you have an answer to that. How do you get people in the room?
You really can't make them.
Go ahead, Chrystal.
No, I was just going to say, you really can't make them. They really have to have a vested interest, and it just. I think that's something that I also have been trying to figure out in a separate but similar issue. Tanasha, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, I am a firm believer, and it can be hard because you may not have the same amount of power or resources initially. But, sometimes when people want to invite you to a table where they want to serve you a separate meal from what everyone else is eating, everybody's eating filet mignon, they want to give you hot dogs. Sometimes you have to scoot your chair out from the table, get up and go build your own table. And I will say, I will share with this group because Chrystal and Leandra already know this, but I am in the process of putting things in place to be out of where I'm at here in Arizona and to be someplace that has a much larger Black population, so I can use my power as a Black woman and be a part of a bigger Black community as a way to impact change. So when they don't want to invite you to the table, or they want to give you, like, everybody else has a chair and you're in like the kids' chair, like you're sitting down here and everybody else is sitting up here, I think you really have to sometimes step away and find out how to build your own table. And that takes a collective.
Absolutely. And sometimes it's a matter of knowing what's in it for the person you're making the ask of. Sometimes people will not want to listen unless they know there is something in it for them. And often it is not the kindness and warmth of their hearts. It could be the business case. And sometimes, it's a low bar to set, the business case, because it should be about humans. But I think it's really important to know, like, what is the ask when you're telling people to get into the room and have the conversation? Because conversations about race and conversations with white folks about Blackness or anti-Black racism, it's like, nobody wants to have that conversation, and as kind as you make it. So I feel like people need to know what you're asking and what you want them to listen to when having a conversation about creating a separate space for Black folks, because there is so much threat that people feel at the idea of other people or marginalized folks coming together. There's this kind of clutching your pearls or resource hoarding, and I think that it's really important to know what you're asking for and what's in it for the person you're asking it of, because white folks, white supremacy culture, I will say, not all white folks, operates off of a what's in it for me, what can I gain from this, and sometimes that's the end. That's the key to the lock, as much as that sucks.
Very well said. Thank you, Tanasha and Leandra. I unfortunately think we're out of time. I think that we need to do part 2 on this at some point. And with that, another live episode of DEI Unmasked, Conversations That Bridge concludes. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our audience for your engagement and participation. Your insights always enrich our conversation and perspectives. We look forward to continuing the journey with you. Don't forget to follow us on the DEI Unmasked Conversations That Bridge LinkedIn page. Mark your calendar for future episodes and keep the dialogue alive on social media using our hashtag DEI Unmasked. Thank you once again for unmasking with us today. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and keep unmasking the world around you. Good night, folks.